Good morning. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the Managing Director of Business of Cannabis. Welcome back to the Business of Cannabis show for Thursday, February 17th. Since 2017, we've highlighted the companies, brands, people, and trends driving the cannabis industry, which is what we like to do here every day. After the rundown of the key stories we're following, we'll get to our BofC Live segment, where today we'll be joined by Deepank Utkhede, who is the founder and director of Vantage Hemp Co. We'd love to hear from you in the comments, and always feel free to visit us at businessofcannabis.com, as well as through all of our social channels at Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. A few announcements. Next Thursday, 1 week from today, we'll be convening online for our monthly retail series. This month, we'll have a focus on the new guidance from regulators on the relationship between brands and retailers in Ontario. On March 10th, we'll be in Brooklyn for BofC New York sessions. We'll be talking about connecting social equity licensees with capital. And April 6th, Business of Cannabis Miami, talking all things cannabis, retail, tech, design, and data. All the information is in the description below. For today's stories, Jones Soda and Monster want to ride the cannabis drinks wave. There's no limit on cannabis sales licenses in New Mexico. Minority Cannabis Business Association's Amber Littlejohn is headed to the U.S. House of Representatives, virtually, and I Am Cannabis shifts away from M&A towards integration. For our first story, cannabis drinks were one of the fastest growing cannabis categories last year, according to Headset, selling more than $64 million in California alone. That according to the story in Forbes. So it's not a surprise that two drink giants, Jones Soda and Monster, are making moves into the space, following big brands like Constellation before them. Now, Seattle-based Jones Soda raised $11 million and scooped up a Canadian shell company with plans to develop cannabis drinks. That according to Biz Daily. And rumor has it that energy drinks maker Monster Beverage Corp could be making a deal with Constellation Brands, the company already heavily invested in canopy growth, according to Market Realist. Now, while there are already plenty of cannabis drinks options in California, many brands are available within only one state, which creates an opportunity for emerging brands to make an impact in less mature markets. Even earlier this week, maybe even yesterday, we covered Can's CEO's move from LA to New York City. Now, more than 100 applications have already been filed in New Mexico to transform medical cannabis stores, tobacco shops, and even a strip club into adult-use cannabis stores. That according to KRQE. And unlike some states, there's no limit to the number of retail licenses available. Now, here are some of the details. Applications were filed in early December, and licensed stores can open for sale starting April 1st, 2022. Each municipality has its own requirements. For example, in Albuquerque, stores can't be within 300 feet of a school or a daycare, and stores have to be a minimum of 600 feet from each other. In Albuquerque alone, with a population of nearly 600,000, within the city there are already 80 licenses under consideration. Earlier applicants will get first dibs on locations so long as they meet other requirements. For our third story, Amber Littlejohn, the executive director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association and a guest speaker at Business of Cannabis New York sessions coming up on March 10th, will testify before the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions, according to a press release. At a virtual hearing titled Small Businesses, Big Impact, Ensuring Small and Minority-Owned Businesses Share in the Economic Recovery, Littlejohn will share the challenges and ongoing barriers minority-owned cannabis businesses face in the industry, such as the effects of federal prohibition and the lack of access to federal relief programs. For our final story, international powerhouse I Am Cannabis, which operates cannabis facilities in Israel, Canada, and Germany, is slowing down on its recent M&A spree to focus on tightening and integrating its new acquisitions into a cohesive team geared for growth. This according to Business Can. Quote, "We've done acquisitions, but now we need to integrate them and make sure that we are growing organically," said CEO Oren Schuster. "To grow only by M&A is very easy, but M&A is fundamental for organic growth because this is the added value that M&A brings." Now, we've often had Oren Schuster on Business of Cannabis and BofC Live, so please check out the full catalog of that on our website at businessofcannabis.com. Those are the stories we're watching today. Join 10,000 others and catch all these stories and more in your inbox every day at 7 a.m. Eastern with our Cannabis Daily newsletter. Coming up on BofC Live, a conversation with Deepank Utkhede, who is the founder and a director of Vantage Hemp Co, based in Greely, Colorado. We're connecting with him to talk about Vantage's approach to hemp extraction and the sector overall. Deepank, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad we can. Before we get into Vantage Hemp, you are in Greely, Colorado. Is that as perfect
Correct.
as in my mind it is?
It is pretty idyllic. We're Greely, for those who don't know, is 1 hour almost directly north of Denver, of the Denver airport. So it's really convenient. You're outside of the hustle bustle of Denver. You can see the mountains. It's on the plains. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever been to Toronto or Ontario. We don't have any mountains within a
Yeah.
couple 100 miles of here. The
Yeah.
weather is awful in February. We kind of have skiing, but it's really like very small hill skiing. And so when I hear people in Colorado, it's like, that seems
Well,
like a better place to spend winter.
yeah, it is actually. It's really nice. It's interesting, so I'm from Vancouver. So when before we started this business, my thoughts of Colorado was it was snow covered all the time, and it was cold, and it was dark. I get down here, and going through the stats, we have in Colorado over 300 days of sun. It rarely snows down in the in the bottom part here, but Aspen, Vail, Breckenridge, Winter Park, literally 2 to 3 hours away, beautiful world-class skiing. At the same level of like Whistler.
Now you're just trying to kill me. You're literally
no,
trying to
sorry,
kill me.
I'm sorry.
So let's talk about the business. So not enough about, it's never enough about Colorado, but
Yeah.
kind of John Denver in that respect. Talk to me about Vantage Hemp. Tell me about the business, sort of the positioning, how you got there, all of those things.
Right. So really, we saw an opportunity. Myself and 4 other founders saw an opportunity in the U.S. CBD market when the Farm Bill was approved in 2018. So the following year, we basically picked Colorado. After an extensive search through different states, picked Colorado as our home base, and proceeded with developing and establishing Vantage Hemp. What we looked at is also when we looked at what part of the business we wanted to get into, we saw when we looked at the companies that if you went seed to shelf, it was an incredibly capital intensive and people intensive proposition. And really, if you looked at the 3 main parts of hemp and CBD, you've got growing of the hemp, you've got the extraction, and then you got the finished goods. We saw, there is a huge brain trust of growing agricultural knowledge that is generational. And we thought, you know what, let's leave it to them. They're the experts. That's not our thing. So we left it to them, and we wisely so, because it's not an easy crop to grow, and it's very finicky. And so we left it to the professionals, best to do that. We looked at finished products. There's, a very well established, both in the nutraceutical and pharmaceutical base of production facilities all throughout the US, big, small, medium, just everywhere. So that capability was already there. Where we saw the lack of knowledge and the lack of capacity was extraction and large scale extraction. There's a lot of like boutique extraction facilities, but what we want to do is be able to supply the Novartises, the PepsiCos, if they got into it, the Cokes, the large scale vendors that would need large amounts of pure API, pure CBD to put in products. So that's why we got it. That's why when we built Vantage, we focus on extraction, and it turned out to be the right call. We also, when we were designing and building the facility and establishing our procedures, we looked at worldwide and also the US and looked at, well, how are they going to regulate it? The FDA has been from the beginning very clear. It is a drug. and it will be approved as a drug. It will never be approved as to date, they've basically said it'll never be approved as a new dietary ingredient because the regulations are stated. Once it's approved as a drug, you can't go backwards. The only way you could do it is if you approved it as a new dietary supplement and then subsequently approved it as a drug. So when you look at it from that point of view, and we looked at what the rest of the world was doing, and they were treating it and controlling it like a drug. And I gotta say, I agree with it. I mean, it is something that people take for their health and wellness. It has very specific pharmacological effects. It binds to a very specific set of receptors in the body. So it's a drug. So the quality needs to be there. And because of that, when we looked at worldwide and domestically, we knew that we had to be GMP. We had to be pharmaceutical GMP in order to produce a product of high quality and consistency, and with using a robust manufacturing process that gives our customers the confidence to use our product.
Yeah. And talk a little about that, because a lot of those things you said seem, oh yeah, that's what we'll do. That makes sense. But like in the context of what is or was and is happening in the States, like talk about that vis-a-vis what others might be doing, right? Like you've set up your facility to be GMP
correct,
ready, right? You've planned ahead that this is going to be treated much more like a pharma than a food input, right?
Right.
That's those are major expenses, and it needs a very specific type of facility. Talk a little bit about sort of the thinking of the facility and also sort of the landscape in which you're operating among others.
Right. So, and excellent question, and it's a very broad question. There's a lot of pieces that fit into that. So, I mean, let's start with the facility. The facility really is it's designed around control. And so what we've done is, so there's two parts to the facility. One is safety. Because we use not only CO2 extraction, we use liquid propane for extraction. So those are in special rooms with special safety features on them. But what we've also done is instead of having the entire, so you have the extraction, you have winterization, distillation, and crystallization. What we've done is we've set up each one of those processes in a separate room. So you can have multiple processes going on without multiple batches going on in the same room, because you can only have one batch or process going on in a room at a time. So facilities that have winterization, distillation, and crystallization occurring in the same room, you can only do one batch at a time, because you can't mix and match these you can't have multiple processes going on because they're all different batches. In terms of the procedures that we've set up, the policies that we set up, every piece of equipment has an SOP that governs how it's operated. That's just how it operates. In terms of how the manufacturing process occurs, we have master batch records that step by step describe each step of the process. But along with that is, every time a step is completed, it requires two-person verification. One, the first person verifies that they've completed the step. The second person basically is verifying that the first person completed it. So there's always a verification to ensure that it's just not one person saying, yeah, I did. It's always two people. So that the impact of that is on your personnel and your head count, because you can no longer have just one person doing distillation, one person doing winterization. You have to have a minimum of two people in each one of these processes. So you always have that first person, who's doing it, and the second person verifying, and they just kind of switch on and off. We also, because we value safety and hold it at a very high standard here, we've put in place procedures that ensure that there's always two people doing every process. So if there's ever a situation where a person goes down or something, there's always someone else that could be there to help or call for help. The follow-on to just establishing those procedures, we had a very comprehensive development pathway, because this is a very new industry. And this is all the processes and procedures and manufacturing processes are being developed. Basically, as we say, we're paving the road as we drive it.
Right.
So there's no, there's not like 60 years of salt crystallization chemistry history that we can just draw on. We're developing, so we're getting like, and because we built a large scale process, we went to a lot of manufacturers that were building for the first time large scale equipment. Because everything was boutique until legalization, it was all very small. So they took the small thing and they just, okay, we'll make it big. But things don't scale always. So when we got the equipment, it was a concerted effort between us and the manufacturer that hadn't already gone out of business, which a lot of our manufacturers did. Us and the manufacturer, or us, taking the equipment, running the process, and then developing the process to optimize both the extraction efficiency and the quality of the material that came out of it. Once we've kind of completed that, we've got our process established, then we enter a phase called validation. And this is a critical part that leads into the DMF, the Drug Master File. Validation is basically, there's basically three parts to it. There's an installation qualification, where you basically prove that you've installed your equipment correctly. There's an operational qualification, which says that the equipment is operationally doing what it should. Like the alarms are going off. If it has a temperature range of 10 to 80 degrees, if you try to put in -5, it won't let you. That, when you turn it on, it actually turns on. When you press start mixing, it starts the mixer. So that's the operational qualification. And then the critical part is process validation. And what process validation is basically, and all of these are all about documenting and documentation. It's documenting that your manufacturing process is robust and reproducible. So with process validation, basically you set up the process that you're going to use. Is usually based on your batch record, and you do it 3 different batches to prove that it's reproducible, and they have to be successive batches.
They can't be like, we did 1,000 and 3 of them are the same.
Three, and we're going to pick these 3. That's not a robust or reproducible process. So you do 3 successive batches, you test them, and you show and you demonstrate that it's under those conditions, it produces your final product that meets your quality requirements.
It's very robust. It also it's not that different, or is actually maybe exactly similar to what's happening here in Canada on the cannabis front, and actually the hemp front too. But it is, it's these robust processes that other sectors, pharma most notably, and food, are up to snuff. It's just not necessarily in new industries. It's very difficult to do because, again, you said like there's no 50-year history of doing exactly what you're doing. That's
exactly.
I mean, I don't know. There's, since the materials moved in, that's the history that's sort of, over the past couple of years. And I guess sort of that lends itself to sort of a business strategy question. Is like, how far ahead are you of I guess other players, or are you just set for like, how big is the moat, I guess, for the business? Like, are you set up for success long term because of the scale, the processes, you've gone through all these things, and now as like you've mentioned, the companies coming in or potentially coming in down the road, pharma, Pepsi, whatever it is, like they're going to be looking for people like you that says, oh, these guys have a track record, 4 years, mass quantities, oils, distillates, isolates, the whole bit. Like, is that sort of, obviously that's the game plan, but how is that progressing?
So, and that goes back to our original business plan when we start setting up, okay, we need to be GMP. Because if you start with food, people can fool themselves to say, oh, it's a small jump to pharmaceutical. It's not. It's, if you go to food and you want to do full GMPs, it's time consuming, and it's a huge capital expenditures, because you often will have to redesign your facility, put in more controls, It's not just as easy as saying, we'll just change a few procedures. It's not. Oftentimes it will require some pretty significant capital upgrades to your facility. If you start at GMP, you've automatically encompassed food, new dietary ingredient. You've encompassed everything else, because GMP is kind of the highest standard for production, because it's our drug regs. Mm-hmm. So once you've achieved that, it allows you to not only go after the pharma industry, but it allows you to also be able to supply everything below that as well. So we're poised not just to really focus on pharma, because the thing with pharmaceutical development is it's a slow burn, right? It's not like, oh, I have this idea for a formulation, I'm just going to make it and put it on the shelf. It is years and years and years, anywhere from 8 to 10 years of development, where you're doing toxicity studies and clinical studies, and submitting it to the FDA or whatever regulatory body for market authorization, and then getting approval, and then putting it on market. It's a long, drawn out process. So that one, you need to get in early with pharma, because it's very difficult to change your suppliers halfway through, or when you're near the end, you're like, oh no, I want to go with these guys. It's not that easy. So it's a very long, drawn out process. So we want to be able to supply the pharma companies early on, but then we can still at the same time be able to have capacity supply the Cokes, the Pepsis, the Gatorades for any recovery drinks, or whoever comes to the table who are outside of the pharma industry. So what that allowed, it gave us kind of we hit the highest standards so we can hit everyone.
Yeah, I like it. Like, plan for the future.
Absolutely.
It's much more difficult to plan.
I
know you mentioned building the road while you're driving on it, but at least the road you're on has lots of applications, as opposed to like a single lane road, right? It's right. Actually it's a super highway that you're building.
It's running really fast. And what we're seeing is because of the capital needed to achieve GMP, and the way the industry is going, and a lot of companies thought they needed to be seed to shelf. They kind of burned through their capital. What we're seeing is a lot of the smaller players, the more boutique players, or even the big ones, they're downsizing, and they're downsizing significantly, to the point where they're going from brick and mortar to virtual, where everyone's working from home, and they're using contract manufacturers to do everything rather than doing it internally. And that's where we kind of fit in. So we can be their supplier, so they don't have to do extraction in-house. We've recently, about 6 months ago, expanded into supplying finished goods, and we're doing it at a pharma level. We're doing it at a GMP compliant processes to be able to not only help with or supply pharmaceutical companies for their clinical trials and the ultimate approval, but also anyone else who wants to put a product on the healthcare market, which is just straight to the shelf. So that allows us to work with these companies as they're downsizing, that we can upsize to meet their demands and their needs. And that's where we're seeing our biggest growth right now, is because companies are now going to this kind of, let's call it asset light models rather than asset heavy models.
And if they think they want to be an asset heavy model, they should watch the beginning of this conversation, because you run through a pretty good rundown of sort of how complex it is and can be.
It absolutely. So these asset light models, they basically are coordinating. They need to coordinate someone to manufacture their API. Then they need someone to do it in their finished goods. What we can do, how we can help them, is we can be their API supplier plus their finished goods supplier, kind of all in one. So it's we call it the one throat to choke.
Yeah. Well, look, I really appreciate hearing about Greely, first of all, but hearing about you, the business, and how you're doing Vantage. And I hope hope you'll pick me up at the airport when I decide to come there to sort of take a look at the
Absolutely.
facility.
Just let me know when you're coming in.
I will. I'm thinking like a March trip to Greely would coincide with some nice spring skiing. So I appreciate the time. Thank you so much, and we'll connect with you down the road.
Sounds good. Excellent.
That was episode 30 of the Cannabis Daily Show. Thank you for joining us here on YouTube, and please do subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow.